Chapter 62 Metamorphosis. Not long after Eventide handed off Bibi to Clypeus and Lancia, they had all followed their shared son into the realms of sleep. It hadn't been a particularly restful slumber, sadly, but he had made do well enough. Now, with the faintly diluted light of the sun shining in through the overhead glass, Eventide began to reawaken to the world around him. Stifling a yawn, he lifted his head to see Bibi still asleep with Clypeus and Lancia on the couch across from him, curled up and held in their hooves. He smiled at the sight, his heart fluttering with adoration and satisfaction. They're so cute like that. As he thought those words, Bibi's face twitched, and even from his place on the opposite couch, Eventide could hear the little guy's stomach rumbling with hunger. The loud, guttural roar served as the alarm for all present. Clypeus and Lancia slowly lifted their heads, blinking away the sleep in their eyes, while Bibi, as was traditional, clamped stubbornly onto sleep with little more than an annoyed grumble. Clypeus said nothing. She looked down at her son with a charmed look before leaning down to lightly nudge him with her nose, stirring him further from his rest.
Oh,
he mumbled drowsily, batting at her face with half-hearted energy.
I don't want to get up. 5 more minutes.
Come on, B. Eventide called over while rising from his seat. He hesitated for a second, trying to judge the right way to get down from the couch without falling flat on his face. Luckily, he managed to do so, albeit with all the grace of a drunk giraffe on stilts. Once he was steady on his hooves, he trotted over and lowered his head to Bibi's ear. It's time for breakfast. Bibi protested, before opening his eye and glaring up at his adopted father.
Not hungry.
In response to that, Eventide proceeded to think happy thoughts about how cute his son looked, pouting up at him like that, and how much fun it was to watch him act all defiant when sleepy. It was one of the most adorable things in all of creation to Eventide, and he made sure to think it and feel it. Bibi's stomach growled. He narrowed his eyes at Eventide in severe disapproval.
That's cheating.
Eventide rolled his eyes. Yeah, well, I gotta do something to get you up on time. Now, he sat back on his haunches and spread his forelegs out. Get over here. Bibi sighed and stood up. As he did, he caught sight of Clypeus and Lancia right behind him. He smiled up at them and nodded.
Morning, Mom. Lancia. Morning.
Clypeus greeted, looking back and forth between him and Eventide in confusion.
What are you doing?
Bibi grinned at her, then leapt from the couch to tackle-hug Eventide in the chest. The force of the impact was enough to send the still off-balance stallion falling back to crash to the floor with a grunt of pain. That didn't stop him from wrapping his hooves around Bibi and holding him tightly, though. Once they were comfortable on the floor, Bibi grinned back at Clypeus.
I'm having breakfast,
he told her before opening his mouth and pulling in the love radiating off of Eventide's person. To Eventide's surprise, it actually became visible as it flowed down his son's throat this time, appearing as a wispy current of pink light. Must be some property of the magic in this world, he thought. Back up on the couch, Clypeus and Lancia exchanged looks of realization before the two of them hopped down and approached. It was Lancia who spoke. You know, you can need things besides emotions, right? Bibi stopped his meal for a moment to look up at him, an eyebrow raised.
Well, I know I can eat other foods, but none of them really do anything to make me less hungry. They just taste good. All right. So do you remember the metamorphosis Lancia mentioned yesterday?
Clypeus asked, while sitting down next to them and putting a hoof on Bibi's back. He frowned for a second, then nodded.
Yeah. You went from being a bunch of slaves to individuals, he said? Because we found a better way to feed,
Clypeus explained, her expression slowly morphing into a smile.
You're always hungry, aren't you?
BB tilted his head in thought.
Well, yeah, I guess. There's always a little pain in my stomach. I just thought that was normal, though. It's usually only bad in the mornings when I wake up. Most of the time I can just ignore it. Why?
Lancia sat down on his other side and put a hoof on his own belly. Well, when we underwent the metamorphosis, we stopped being hungry all the time. We still have to eat, yeah, but we don't have to rely on just emotions to do it. And we can actually be full. Eventide slowly sat up, looking between the two in curiosity. So, are you saying BB can undergo this metamorphosis thing? He asked, his eyes finally settling on his son. Clypeus nodded.
Yes. In fact, he would be expected to do so at the hive sooner or later.
She replied before affixing BB with a more pointed look.
BB? Do you mind if I walk you through how to do it?
BB hesitated for a second, his wings twitching on his back. He glanced up at Eventide, looking deep into his eyes.
Can I?
Eventide looked between the three changelings before him for a second. His eyes eventually settled on Clypeus, a hard look on his face. Does it hurt? She immediately shook her head.
Oh no! It's one of the best things I've ever felt! Every changeling who went through it agrees on that, at least. It's like...
She looked down, holding a hoof up to her chest.
It's like a piece of ourselves that was always missing is finally returned. A piece you don't know how you lived without for so long. It feels like becoming whole after a lifetime of missing something incredibly important.
It's a little different for every changeling, Lancia added, though he was nodding in agreement. But she isn't wrong. For all of us, it was a very fulfilling experience. The only changeling I can think of who thought low of it is Pharynx, but I get the feeling he just doesn't want to admit that it felt good. Well, those are pretty solid testimonies, if Eventide had ever heard them. After a few seconds of contemplation, he nudged BB off of him, sat up, and scooted back a few feet. All right, if BB's comfortable with it, then go for it.
Yeah, I'm okay with this.
BB acknowledged with a sharp nod.
Will I get all colorful like you guys?
Clypeus, with a tender smile, lowered herself onto her belly so she was lying directly in front of BB.
You can look however you want. Most of us have a preferred appearance, but it's hardly set in stone.
BB relaxed a little at the assurance. He smiled and nodded.
Okay, I think I'm ready. What do I need to do? Close your eyes.
He did as instructed.
Now what? I want you to reach for your magic. You know how to do that, right? Uh-huh. It looks and feels like green fire in my head and chest.
BB answered, before his horn lit up with green light, gently humming in the air. Clypeus looked at the horn for a second, looking to be remembering something. If Eventide had to guess, she was recalling when her own magic looked like that. After a second, she focused back on his face.
Okay. Now I want you to reach past it, as deep into your being as you can. If you do it right, you should find a ball of pink light.
BB's face twitched a few times with strain, a bead of sweat forming on his forehead.
I think I see it,
he said, his teeth clenched with strain at the unfamiliar effort. The green light on his horn began to flicker, a few stray embers of pink flying off of it to drift freely through the air. That is the love you have inside, Lancia picked up in a whisper. All of the love you've ever absorbed without thinking about it, that you haven't digested yet. Everything you've stored away for a rainy day.
Now I want you to think. Who do you love most?
Clypeus asked, her gaze briefly shooting over to look at Eventide.
My dad,
BB answered, his face slowly starting to relax. He must have been getting the hang of whatever it was he was doing, Eventide mused.
Okay, Think about him as hard as you can. Everything about him you love and cherish, and everyone else you've ever loved or cared about. And while you're doing that, I want you to let that love out, like you would with the fire if you were casting a spell.
BB's face scrunched up with strain, the glow on his horn growing brighter. And to Eventide's shock, a pink light began to beat in his chest, right where his heart was, pulsing in tandem with his heartbeat. He let out a few hisses of pain through clenched teeth, a few more beads of sweat forming on his forehead.
I'm not sure.
It's okay, Lancia assured him with an affectionate nuzzle to the back of the head. It's natural to feel anxious about letting it out. But trust me, sharing love is so much better than taking it all and keeping it for yourself.
And besides that, how will Eventide know you really love him?
Clypeus pressed on, briefly glancing his way again.
If he can't see it for himself, like we can. You have to let it out for him to see.
That seemed to be what BB needed to hear. He visibly relaxed and took a deep breath. Suddenly, his eyes snapped open, and the pink glow in his chest grew into a blinding light that forced Eventide to squint. An intense gust of wind was kicked up from the surge of power, making his mane and tail billow and dance around behind him. Then, as suddenly as the light came, it disappeared. Eventide opened his eyes all the way to see that where BB had once stood, there was now a cocoon of a strange, glowing blue material. It hovered in midair for several seconds, pulsing and humming softly with magic. It drifted down to the floor, and the second it made contact with the smooth crystalline surface, the air was filled with a deafening crack and another flash of light. Finally, the light faded away entirely, and Eventide could see again. He blinked a few times to clear away the spots, then leaned forwards to get a better view. His eyes widened at what he saw. BB didn't look all that different from how he had before. His chitin was the same dark shade of gray, almost black, that it always was, and his eyes were still blue, having only gotten a shade or two darker. In contrast with this, though, his fin and tail had both become a similar shade of blue to match his eyes, as had his shell. On his chest, about where it would be on his border collie body, was a triangle of chitin colored a contrasting shade of white, pointing towards the floor. His fangs were gone now, and of course, the holes in his forelegs had completely filled in. He blinked a few times and looked down at himself to assess the changes. His eyes flew wide, and his jaw dropped open when he found a distinct lack of holes tunneling through his legs. His hind legs gave out, sending him falling to his haunches while his forelegs began to explore his new form. Lancia raised an eyebrow. Huh. You know, I thought you'd get a few more colors than that, he mused thoughtfully. BB paused in his exploration to look back up at his biological father.
Why would I? I like the way I looked already,
he replied before turning his eyes back to Clypeus.
Did I do it right?
She stared at him, wide-eyed. She clamped her own hanging jaw shut, a warm smile spreading on her face.
Yes, you did it perfectly. You look so handsome.
He beamed at the praise, his shell suddenly springing open to let his new sky-blue wings buzz in excitement. They were free of the rips and tatters that Eventide was used to, although there was still the horizontal crease running through one of them from when he had molted. In fact, now that he thought about it, all of BB's scars were still present. The path of lighter chitin along his side, and the crease in his wing. Not to mention he was still skinny, even if that issue had become lessened over the years of hiking up the Everfree Trail. And then BB turned to face him. They locked gazes, and the room fell silent. BB slowly put his wings away under his new shell, before taking a few hesitant steps forward.
Dad? What do you think?
He asked, sounding timid. Eventide blinked. Well, I think you look good. I'm more worried about how you feel, he replied without even missing a beat.
I feel good, actually. Mom wasn't kidding, that was.
He said, his voice a little distant. After a second or two, he suddenly leapt up into the air, doing a backflip out of sheer invigoration.
It was so exciting! I've never felt like that before! And now I can actually feel full?
Lancia nodded. Totally. I'm sure Princess Twilight has some food lying around for us somewhere. Eventide smiled fondly at that idea, unsteadily rising back to his hooves. Hey, I'm down for some breakfast. You think she has ham and eggs? Clypeus and Lancia suddenly both shot him very bewildered looks. He frowned. What? I'm hungry. Clypeus cleared her throat uncomfortably.
Well, yes, but, you're a pony?
She pointed out sheepishly, as if unsure how to break some piece of horrifying news. Eventide tilted his head. Well, for the moment, yeah. I mean, I don't exactly like it. I want my hands back. Why do you mention it? Ponies don't eat meat, Lancia furthered, rubbing the back of his head. Not from what I've heard, anyway. Ponies don't... Oh. Eventide blinked, blushed, and looked away. Right. Bibi giggled at his expense before flying over and settling down on his back. Once he was comfy, he patted him on the back of the head a few times.
Don't worry, Dad. We're supposed to go home tomorrow, right? You can have your hands and ham back then.
Eventide snorted. Clypeus and Lancia chuckled to themselves and joined him. Together, the family set off from the lounge in search of food.